Hey everyone, welcome to the Soul Tree Project podcast episode number 33. Wow, 33 is pretty good for me. Started last spring, late winter, and am now continuing at a steady pace to provide content. As a lot of you know, there's also YouTube videos that go anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15 minutes long, which are just little short video blogs or vlogs as people call them. So there's that, which has also been great. And I think that in general I'm excited going into this new year and continuing this project to make it more and more complete and more consistent. One of the things I'd like to work on is providing the content at a more consistent pace, because it's kind of sporadic. I try to put something out weekly, at least bi-weekly, but none of my listeners really know what day, what days. So, to come up with a schedule of maybe every Monday and Friday, there's something released, whether it's a podcast or a video blog or something else. There's other things that I've been thinking about doing. So that's kind of what's going on here. I know that there's people out there listening on Podbean. I know there's people out there listening on YouTube, Stitcher, iTunes. So there's a lot of platforms. I do the video for every podcast right now because I think that it seems that video content is pulling a lot of people in, a lot of listeners in. So go check that out if you haven't. If you're interested in seeing the video, I know for me, I do listen to a lot of podcasts and things on YouTube, but I typically end up just putting it down and listening to it anyway. But it's always nice to pull it up whenever I want to see it and know that the video is there. So that's nice, but it also drains your battery if you're on your phone. So, win some, you lose some. So I am very excited about this episode today. And I also, before we get into it all, I just want to give you a few announcements. First is what's coming. What's coming up next week is going to be cool. So Daniel Brisbane from Above Treeline Coaching, he's a wonderful life coach. He lives in the Denver area. He's got a ton of experience with public speaking and coaching, and he's just an amazing guy. He's coming on, and we're going to do at least 5 to 10 minutes of the podcast episode in the river here in Colorado in the winter. So what that's going to mean is that we're going to be doing the Wim Hof method. For those of you who don't know about Wim Hof, check it out. It's pretty cool. And this is something we've both been training on for a pretty long time, over a year. So we've got the experience. And we'll be in that freezing cold winter river. And we'll talk for about 5 minutes or so, maybe give or take. But what we'll do is provide some meaningful content as we're experiencing the cold water. Why are we doing this? Well, one, because it's funny and it's fun and people want to watch us freeze. The other reason is because it's to model a way in which we can approach these difficult life situations and face nature and successfully do so, and also talk about something meaningful. Maybe we'll talk about what it's like to approach the cold and how one does that and what metaphors that provides for life, and how that assists us with both our physiological, mental, spiritual, and emotional health, stuff like that. Then we'll get out of the river, we'll cut the scene, and then we'll go dry off and get dressed and continue recording the podcast somewhere else. So you can look forward to having Daniel Brisbane on here next week. We'll record on Wednesday, probably release on Thursday. So check that out. Go to abovetreelinecoaching.com. I think it's .com, but it might be .org. Check Above Treeline Coaching out. I'll also be releasing an episode with two people coming on. We'll do it on a video conference. Andrew Jokum, who has the wildly cool and pretty successful YouTube channel Sorting Myself Out. He's taking a break from that right now, but he'll be coming on with Mercury Black, who's also been referred to on the internet as bipolar lunatic, as a kind of endearing term, not as a negative term. And he's brilliant. They're both just amazing. They both have a lot to offer, a lot to talk about. So we're going to have a great time. And so that'll probably be recorded on Friday, released next Saturday or Sunday or something like that. So you can definitely expect a couple episodes next week. And then I'll just keep rolling from there. So I hope you're enjoying the content, and I hope as you get closer and closer to this new year, you're starting to reflect on what your life is presenting you, how you're experiencing life, what things you want to shift, what things you want to embrace even more. And I hope that the Soul Tree Project is just a place, just a resource, one of many, I hope, a resource that provides you with a little support. Like and subscribe. It really helps if you do that. Also, it doesn't matter if you're on YouTube, Podbean, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever. Just hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button, giving a review, whatever you can do. Also, I'll leave a link to my Patreon here in the description. If you're interested in providing a donation, big or small, anything makes a difference, go to the Patreon link in the description of the podcast, and you can do that, and that would be appreciated, so we can continue to do this on and on and on as far as the eye can see. Coaching, last announcement before we get into the bulk of the content here. I am providing life coaching services. For those of you who don't know, I am trained, certified in many different models of working with people. We have the Gestalt Self, Soul, Spirit training that I've been certified in through Dr. Roger Strachan, hundreds of hours with him. We have the Earth-Based Institute, where I have attained my Nature Connected Coach certification. And then we have a bunch of other places where my continued education is coming from. So if you're interested in coaching, if you're someone who needs that extra support, whether it's on video conference or in person here in Colorado, email me at holsapple, HOLSAPPLER, the initial R, 32 at gmail.com, holsappler32 at gmail.com. You can also send feedback or questions about the podcast on that email. So, let's get right into it. That was a long introduction. I might have to speed it up somehow when I go back and review all this. This episode is called The Epistemological Shoehorn and the Disembodied Self. This is one that I know it sounds kind of aloof and maybe not, like, what does that really mean? Is that a grounded subject? But it really is, and let me get into this. The definition of epistemology, according to Merriam Webster, is the study or a theory of the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits and validity. The study or a theory of the nature and grounds of knowledge, especially with reference to its limits and validity. I've also heard epistemology defined as the study of how we know things. So, what is the epistemological shoehorn? Well, to be shoehorned is to be kind of stuck into this limited framework, this limited space where we're not able to access the full resources around us. We're not able to see things fully, broadly. We're not allowed to move about. We're shoehorned into this little space. The epistemological shoehorn is the tendency to get stuck into one way of knowing or limited ways of knowing. And let's explore the definition of know. This is also from Merriam Webster. To perceive directly, to have direct cognition of. That's one. 2, to have an understanding of importance of knowing oneself. 3, to recognize the nature of, to discern. So those are a few ways that we could define knowing. Now, how do we know anything, right? I mean, we can look at various ways of approaching knowing something. There's religious knowing, in which we know what we believe, we know where we're going, we know where we came from, we know our faith, right? And we know these things if we're religious, right? Not making any assumptions, but it's a very traditional historical way of knowing something is through a religion or a mythical viewpoint. And you could say, well, they didn't really know that because I know that stuff's not true. You know, Jesus didn't really resurrect, or, you could say the Buddha didn't really do so and so under the Bodhi tree. That's just a myth. But herein lies the conversation, because that's one way of knowing things. We could call that scientific knowing. Or when it becomes shoehorned, we could call it scientism. And scientism is a way of knowing things to the exclusion of other ways of knowing things that is purely rationalistic, logical, and perceived through what we call the scientific method. And this has been really introduced to our society in the West over the last few hundred years, a couple hundred years since the Enlightenment. And I don't remember exactly how long it's been, but it's been some time. And so that came in, and more romantic, religious ways of viewing life became less and less valid, and now less and less people align with religious viewpoints and more align themselves with the scientific mind. It's a different way of knowing things. Now let's talk about other ways of knowing things. We have intuitive knowing, which isn't really related to religious or scientific knowing, in my opinion. Intuitive knowing is a way of knowing something that provides you a felt sense of direct experience with some sort of content where you just feel that you know. Whether it's you can pick up on someone else's feelings, you have a feeling something's happening or going to happen. You could relate it to instincts as well. This is a really different way of knowing. It's not scientific because you can't really prove it based on a method. It's just you have a feeling, and sometimes something does happen, and that there was something there. I had a weird feeling, and then all of a sudden this person walked in and said this, and it synchronistically aligned. So intuitive knowing is another way that we could say that you could know something. I'm trying to think of another definition or another description of intuitive knowing to provide a little more framework for that one. In relationships is a good example. A lot of times, you just know what your significant other is thinking or feeling. Like, you can just tell, and you don't have like a logical explanation. It's like, yeah, maybe there's some body language, maybe there was a tone of voice, but there was something else going on too. I could feel something wasn't right? Or if you look at a lot of these natural disasters that happen, whether it's earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, there's people who have this sense of something's in the air. Or if you watch the animals react before these things happen, they're all over the place. The birds are flying, and everything's ominous. And so there's this way in which there's a knowing of something's happening. This is a way of knowing, a way of perceiving reality. Now we can also have imaginal knowing. What's happening in my inner world? In imaginal knowing has nothing, again, to do with scientific knowing. It has nothing necessarily to do with hard matter. It doesn't. It could overlap intuitively with hard matter, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Imaginal knowing is a way of interacting with your own perceived reality. Think about an artist. An artist is very good with imaginal knowing, and if the better that the artist is, the more overlaps with this physical reality, because people perceive the art and say, wow, this is amazing art. So, or we can have dreams. Dreams that are, they're not like literally true, but they're pointing to something going on in our psyche. They're pointing to some other substrate of reality that we experience on a day-to-day basis. So imaginal knowing is a way in which, either consciously or unconsciously, we perceive reality in a specific way that is not through the traditional scientific lens, but still is valid. You could have a dream of a buffalo walking through a field, and what is that telling you? What is that teaching you? What does that mean to you personally? It has nothing to do with objective truths. It's a very subjective experience for you. And so that's an imaginal way that your psyche, your brain, your nervous system, your whole body, mind, spirit is working with your reality. So there's a lot of other examples, obviously, that we could all think of imaginal knowing. Poetic knowing. It's similar to imaginal knowing. It's very overlapped with imaginal knowing. It's typically a little more verbal. But a poetic knowing is a way of synthesizing reality that brings things alive a little bit. You could talk about a tree very scientifically. The tree stands, it does this, it's made up of these different scientific elements. Or you could talk about it poetically. A beautiful tree with the leaves blowing in the wind and the roots reaching down as the branches reach up towards the heavens. Whatever. You could find a beautiful poem about that. So a poetic way of knowing things. It's just as valid, in my opinion. Just because it can't be materialistically confined, right? So there's also physiological knowing. I have direct experience of something's happening in my body. I'm having an experience physiologically. I know that I'm having that experience. I can't qualify it. I can't necessarily give you a direct definition of my feelings. I'm going to do my best. Like, I feel a tingling sensation in my left hand. A tingling sensation. There's nothing necessarily scientific about that, right? But it's just something that I'm experiencing. So, physiological knowing. Last one I wanted to provide as an example is axiological knowing. And axiological knowing means as one relates to values, what's valuable, morally or otherwise. I value integrity. I value honesty. I value hard work. I value meditation. I value, what else do I value? I value seeking, spiritual seeking, knowledge seeking. So this is a way of knowing. These values they're embedded within me. It's a way of perceiving reality. It's embedded in the subjective truth of who I am. So you get the picture that I'm painting. I mean, and I don't know all the ways we can know. Okay, guys, I don't comprehend all the different ways of knowing. These are just some examples to give you a taste that there are many different ways of approaching the world in which we perceive. And the problem lies in the confinement of one way or another. If you get overly religious, you exclude scientific possibilities. If you get overly scientific, you might exclude imaginal, religious, poetic, axiological possibilities. So what I'm proposing in this as a philosophical principle is that wouldn't it be useful to have an integrated or an integral, as Ken Wilber would say, viewpoint of knowing, where we can see the value in each of these ways of approaching knowing without being confined by that particular viewpoint. So let's take two poles. Okay, we'll take a very radical, new age, some people would say airy-fairy thinker or feeler. On the other pole, we'll take a very scientific, rigid thinker. Okay? Now, on one end, you'll have on the quote unquote airy fairy side, you'll have almost an opposition, possibly, to science, as if, oh well, those findings don't hold water in my world, because in my world, everything is the law of abundance. Okay, that's just one example. So all that other stuff over there, it doesn't serve me unless the science is telling me, is confirming what I want to hear. Then it's a part of my shoehorned viewpoint. It's a part of my limited perspective. But otherwise, it doesn't fit. So this is what we call confirmation bias. So someone already knows what they want to believe. They've already decided, I want to believe that everything is one way. It's this way. So what I will do is only take the information that supports that desired belief, and I'll discount the rest. Okay? You could take the scientist. You could totally discount the more new age approaches of spirituality, because it doesn't fit into your paradigm as a scientist or as someone who values science of how things should be and what we should value and how we know things, right? This is really a problem of how we know things. And my proposal is that we know things in a lot of different ways, okay? And none of them, I don't see how one of them is more or less valuable than the other, but that they should all be included in a perception of reality. So if I can take the imaginal, the scientific, the poetic, the religious, the mythical, the mythological, and I can look at it as one big pedagogical and abstract picture, and say, wow, there's so much available here by way of perception. And maybe I can dip my toe in the water of each one a little bit as I'm chewing on my experience. And I don't have to have one way of knowing. I can say, oh, I feel this is valid here, and I also feel this is valid over here. So then the second part of the title here, the disembodied self. And the reason that that's in there is because when I was thinking of the epistemological shoehorn, I also realized that what that leads to is disembodiment, where we're not really connected to the fullness of our reality. In some ways, if you take scientists, for example, or the prevalent scientism that is rampant in our Western world right now, what a lot of times happens is there's a rigidity and a stagnation that keeps the mindset so hyper-focused on this one perspective that the actual connection to experience, to life force is cut off. We've become so confined by this viewpoint of reality that other ways of knowing are no longer valuable. We've been disembodied. Now you can take it for a extreme fundamentalist religious person. Extreme, okay? The same thing can be said. They're so confined to this one viewpoint of reality that they're stagnant and rigid, and there's no real life force coming in. So how do we re-embody the self? Because the problem is, if we get stuck into any one specific way of knowing, we are not perceiving or engaging life in a way that's complete. And that will eventually lead to a sort of stagnation and fundamentalism. So what we can do is start to feel a connection to what we know, rather than just think it, right? Because, I was talking to someone the other day about this, and her name's Jennifer Hinton. She's awesome. But we were talking about how a lot of times what happens is we get so top heavy. We in our heads, philosophically, or just what we believe, that we lost connection to that which we are so extreme about saying and propagating. So if I'm spreading scientism, oh, it must be this way. We have to use the scientific method to know everything. It has to be done this way. If it's not done this way, then, everything's a wash. But I don't feel a deep sense of connection to what I'm talking about. I'm just kind of cycling through this kind of tornado of beliefs over and over again. I'm stuck in that. If I can't feel a direct experience of what I believe, then what am I really saying? I don't have experience of that thing anymore. I'm out of touch with it. I might as well be talking about something I have no idea about. Tom Brown Jr. always says one of his great mentors, Stalking Wolf, told him, the difference between knowledge and wisdom is experience. Right? Experience will bring you wisdom. But dry knowledge doesn't really do anything. It doesn't you can read a bunch of textbooks and you can have all these abstract thoughts and you can spin around and around in your brain with those things, but unless as people we have a direct experience of knowing it in our bones, then that knowledge is disconnected from spirit, if you'll take my metaphor, disconnected from life force, disconnected from meaning. So let me see here what this next piece is that I had. So the goal here is to offer a possible way in which we can have a multivaried toolkit of knowing scientifically, knowing poetically, knowing mythologically, knowing physiologically, knowing axiologically. And these things are interweaved. Like, we can go in and out of each one. And we can hold the tension of those polarities. One of the things I'm learning from Carl Jung right now and reading his writings is he was very big on polarities, tension in polarities. So, for example, take religion and science. There's a tension there, a tight tension, or spirituality and science, a tight tension. It's so tense that it's hard to hold. And so a lot of times, because the tension is hard to hold, what we do as people is we lean on one direction or the other so that we can avoid that discomfort. My proposal and what I'm learning right now is that the wisdom actually comes from being able to stand in the middle of the tension of the multiple polarities of life and hold it and be that strong, be that big, and just be with that. So, there's contradictions. Oh, interesting. But that the false assumption that we make is because there's contradictions, they cannot both be true. That's the assumption. It's like it can't both be true because one has to exit out the other. There has to be a winner and a loser. So I'll give you a psychological example with parenting. Okay, say you're a kid growing up. You really love your dad, let's say, but then you also feel like you hate him sometimes, right? You hear kids say this all the time. I hate you, right? At least in America. I hate you. So, do you love him or you hate him? Both can't be true, right? Both can't simultaneously exist. We couldn't possibly stand for that. You have to be one way or the other. No, I mean, it's both. It's like I have a sense of a part of me that feels this way and a sense of the part of me that feels that way. And because that tension is so intense, it's hard to hold. It's like, Dad's a jerk. I love Dad, So that creates a lot in relationships all the time, creates a ton of conflict. You feel one way, then you feel another way. And the more that we can learn that there's nothing wrong with the polarity in of itself, the polarity in of itself is actually a transformative possibility, because things do not grow without tension. Everything in nature, everything that we can perceive that grows and transforms, does so out of extreme tension, extreme challenge. It's when, as my mentor Michael Jaspe taught me, maximum disequilibrium and maximum energization is the point of transformation. Okay, so we're disoriented and we're very energized. Boom, something changes. And you can view that, you can perceive that in nature. It's called the bifurcation point. And it's the observation that things do not grow linearly, they grow exponentially. And Rob Meltzer also has taught me that. If you look at past episodes, we have one with Rob Meltzer where he really explains this well. My point is that the ability to hold the tension, epistemologically speaking, with the way that we know things is going to lead to something great. And I can stand in the middle of science, religion, spirituality, mythology, poetry, imagination, and all the things that I'm missing right now. And I can say that, like, I don't fully understand. I don't have an intellectual way of explaining to you why all these things can have their own source of validity. I don't have a magical pill that can make that feel coherent. All I can say is that if I step into one of these viewpoints, I can see the validity of it. And I step out of it and I step into another one, I can see the validity of it. And then I step into the middle and I can hold the tension. I can say to myself, wow, scientifically speaking, this experience I'm having doesn't make any sense, but I know it's true. Or I can say, wow, I know that I'm having an experience right now, but from this other scientific perspective, it doesn't feel complete. So that's going to lead to a deep urge to transcend that and have a more integrated viewpoint. And so to be able to stay in the chaos without knowing what the pathway through is one of the essential steps in transformation. All the times in my personal life where I've been in a conflict of tension of opposites that seems irreconcilable, like I do not know what the way through this conflict is. Every single time that's happened, and I just was present in the chaos with a sense of awareness and a sense of paying attention to what's happening, always something made itself available that allowed me to reconcile that tension and integrate it into an ordered reality that I can navigate comfortably, safely, and competently. But in order to get there, I had to be willing to be unsafe in my worldview, in my perspective, maybe even physically, it doesn't matter, but I had to be willing to step into the chaos to perceive something that was profitable to me emotionally, spiritually, mentally, on and on. Also, I think it's interesting with the definition of knowing, because the first one says to perceive directly, to have direct cognition of. That's pretty broad. Yeah, you can perceive a lot of things directly. And so it lends some credibility to the argument that knowing isn't necessarily provable one way or another. It's an experience. So I hope you all are with me so far. I hope that this is making sense. And I know that from the abstract point of view, it's very philosophical. And then when we bring it down to the psychological point of view, like the example with, I feel this way towards this person, love, hate, it can be very practical, the way that we can apply this. So if anything to walk away with, I would say it's the ability to hold tension without jumping to conclusions, without making assumptions, without seeking to be comfortable, so that we don't have to have our worldview challenged. I mean, and you can see this on the political spectrum, where it's uncomfortable to not know the answer. So let me join this party, or let me join this thought, so I can feel like I have a group identity. Because the group identity, the tribal way, it's tribalism. The way that we jump into these group identities, it's so instinctual. It's a way to identify that keeps us safe. It's not good or bad. It's just a tendency. I went to a hockey game the other night. Okay? It's crazy the way that the group mind pulls you in, right? If everyone's booing, the ref made a bad call, I can feel inside of me like, yeah, and you can see how scary that can get when you look at something like Nazi Germany, or when you look at something like back, way back when the gladiators were fighting, just ruthlessly killing each other for humans' entertainment, and everybody got into that group mentality and cheered it on. And so that's what we do with ideas. Yeah, science. Yeah, religion. Yes, this. Yeah, that. It's so tribal, and sometimes it's so hard to see it for what it is, because we're so wrapped up in the emotion. I mean, when I was at the hockey game, when everyone was angry about something, I was like, yeah, like, I'm pissed. Like, that was a horrible call. Like, I could feel it in my body, but I was watching it. I was aware of that, and I didn't have to jump into the group mind. It was a conscious choice if I decided to do so. That's powerful. That's called being an individual. And that's what we're all hoping. I'm hoping that's what we all strive to work on, is being that individual that can stand in the middle of the tension and make a choice based on what is soulfully directed, rather than what is the most easy reaction for comfort or instinct. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, the Epistemological Shoehorn and the Disembodied Self. I am not sure if what I said was coherent in any way, shape, or form, but I hope it was, and I'll have to move on either way. So sending my love and care to all of you. Again, like and subscribe. Send an email to fullsampler32@gmail.com with any questions or topics you'd like me to address, or if you're interested in coaching programs. And I will be with you soon. You can expect to hear from me next week. Thank you very much.